हॅलो स्टुडंट्स, myself डॉक्टर शेकी प्रतिमा, अहमदनगर जिल्हा मराठा विद्याप्रसारक समाजाज, न्यू आर्ट्स कॉमर्स अँड सायन्स कॉलेज, अहमदनगर. Economic Policy of India since 1991. This is the ninth chapter as per 11th standard syllabus. In the last video, I just introduced that what is the new economic reforms and why Indian economy will accept that the new economic policy. Since independence, the India has followed the policy of socialistic pattern of society based on the equality. So the government had to put many controls and the regulations to on the each and every economic activity. Therefore, the period of 1950 to 80 was known as the license Raj. But slowly, the good effects of this policy started disappearing, and the problems of the stagnation, then inflation, then frustration, imbalances, etc. They started the increasing. This had hampered the rate of growth of output and the employment. Therefore, the urgent need was felt to free the economy from unwanted controls and also the restrictions. This led to the introduction of the economic reforms in 1991. In the last video, I just discussed that the need for the economic reforms or the new economic policy. And also, I have just introduced that the characteristics of the new economic policy. And then one of the most important chart I have discussed that the components of the new economic policy. On that chart, I just introduced that the three part is the most important. Three components are most important new economic policy. The first is the liberalization, second is the privatization, and third is the globalization. So in this video, I have just started that the first point related to the new economic component. The first component is like the liberalization. We know the liberalization, it refers to the economic freedom or the freedom for the economic decisions. Means what? We know it means the producers, then consumers and owners of the factors of production are free to take the decision to promote the self interest. We know the factors of production. How many factors of productions? There are four factors of production: the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. We know these all are the free for the take the decision to promote the self interest. Then the Adam Smith, he is a well known the classical economist. He his book is like the Wealth of Nations. He suggested that the economic liberalization is the best economic policy to promote the economic growth and well-being of the people. So the Adam Smith will also support for that the liberalized policy. The according to the classical economists, the economic policy which leads to the reduction, if not removal, of the barriers in the working of the market mechanism and free the competition is called economic liberalization. That's the definition of the liberalization. But the liberalization means a complete removal of the trade barriers. In other words, we know make the economy free from the unnecessary controls and the regulations, such as like the licensing, then the import quota, then the tariff, etc., which stop your the economic development. So that's why the Indian economy will accept that the liberal policy. They will support to our economy. So this liberalization will lead to our the economic development. So let's we discuss to the measures taken for the liberalization. The first measure is like the flexibility of the interest rates. We know the under the policy of liberalization, the commercial banks have the freedom to determine the rate of interest depending upon the market forces of demand and supply. We know if the demand will increase automatically, the supply is also increases and production process it's a fast. It's a rapidly increases. So that's why the commercial bank will accept that the flexible rate of interest. Then the second point is like the freedom for the expansion of industries. In this new liberalized policy, we know the industries are free to diversify the production capacity and reduce the cost of production. We know the cost of production is the most important point. If you have to reduce that the cost of production, so price it will be reduced, and automatically we increase that the demand. If your commodities demand is increased, so that time you increase the production, and that part will also generate the employment. No industry could produce the beyond that limit. Now the industries are free to decide their own production limit on the basis of the market requirements. So that is the measure taken by the liberalization. Then the next the measure is like the abolition of the monopolized and the restrictive trade practices. We know the MRTP Act. This is the most important act in 1969. So this act is, according to this act, all those companies having the assets worth rupees the 100 crores and more were the classified as the MRTP firms, and were the subject to several restrictions. Now these the firms have to freedom to take their the own decisions. Now these firms have to the freedom to take the investment decisions. So that is the abolition of the monopolized and the restrictive trade practices. Then the next point is like the reforms in FIRA, it's like the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. Means like that is the restricted act to bring about the flexibility in the laws relating to the foreign exchange, like the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. It's replaced by the Foreign Exchange Management Act. This will also the encourage to the international trade. This act, FEMA, like the Foreign Exchange Management Act. So that Management Act will also the support for that the international trade. Then the next the measure taken for the liberalization is like the investment in infrastructure. We know that the infrastructure is the most important factor which is play the main role of that the industrial development. So the infrastructure was the open to domestic as well as the foreign investors. They could invest in rail, roads, and also the power projects. So automatically that infrastructure is developed, and it is the support to your economy. Then the next measure is like the encouragement to the foreign technology. The liberalization has allowed the use of foreign technology in high priority industries. The liberalization will appointed to the MNCs like the multinational companies, and we attract that the FDI, the foreign direct investment. This helps to reduce the cost and make the industries the competitive. That is the main cause of that the foreign technology. Then the next the measure is like through the SEBI. SEBI is like the Securities and Exchange Board of India. It is established on the 12th April 1992. This step was introduced to the protect that the interest of the investors in also the securities. It promotes to the development and also regulate the securities market. This SEBI will secure to your the investment. So automatically the investment is increases. So these are the measures taken for the liberalization. That is called as the liberalization. Basically, the economic policy which leads to the reduction, if not removal, of barriers in the working of the market mechanism, and free competition is called as the liberalization. That is called as the liberalization. So let's we discuss the second component related to this new economic policy, like the privatization. Privatization, it refers to the ownership from the public to the private sector. Public sector means which sector? The governmental sector. The concept of privatization can be explained in two ways. In the narrow in the narrow sense, we know that the privatizations means the transfer of the ownership from the public to private sector. In the broader sense, is like it means like the introduction of the private management and control with other, like the or the without changes in ownership of public enterprises. We know that in simple words, the privatization it refers to a process that reduces the involvement of public sector and increases that to the private sector in economic activities. Basically, if we have to focus the definition of privatization, privatization means to reduce the involvement of public sector and increased dash to the private sector in economic activities. According to the Dr. Pense, the privatization means it is a process which reduces the involvement of the state or the public sector in a country's economic activities. That is called as the privatization. Then the next economist will also explain that the definition of privatization, the Peter Drucker. The disinvestment of public sector units by the government is called as the privatization. That is the definition of the privatization. So let's discuss the next point related to the privatization measures taken for the privatization. The first point is like the disinvestment. We know the disinvestment is the most important part. Disinvestment is the important step undertaken to the reforms the public sector. It is the act of the selling shares of sick public sector units to the private sector. It means the government decided to sell the equity capital of the SPSUs of the private industries or the the corporate bodies and the financial institutions. This investment is undertaken to a fiscal need in India. It means the money is raised through the disinvestment to reduce the fiscal deficit. Like the, for example, disinvestment of Maruti, then the IPCL, then VSNL, then the ITDC hotels, etc. That is called as the disinvestment. Then the second measures taken for the privatization, it's like the de-reservation policy. We know that the de-reservation policy means what? The number of industries reserved for the public sector has been reduced under privatization. The industrial policy of 1956 reserved the 17 industries for the public sector. The new economic policy reduced this number to 8, then gradually to 3 and then 2. At present, only railway transport and the atomic energy, these are the two reserved for the public sector, and other is open, totally 100% open for the private sector. That is called as the de-reservation policy. Then the next point is like the establishment of BIFR, like the Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction. The BIFR means what? The NEP means the new economic policy has set up the Board of Industrial and the Financial Reconstruction to take the decision regarding sick public sector units. Basically, the Board of Industrial and the Financial Reconstruction, like the BIRF, has been set up to the taken decision regarding to sick and also the public sector units. The board first studies the possibility of revival of sick unit. If not, then they are allowed to the wind up or the privatize. That is called as the establishment of the BIFR. By the end of 1996, 188 cases of sick public sector units were referred to the BIFR. So the measure is the most important in the privatization. Then the next the measure is like the creation of the National Renewal Board, like the NRB. When the loss making public sector units are closed, the workers have to face the problem of the unemployment and also the poverty. We know the unemployed people, we belong to a below poverty line. And each and every time, the government tries to the reduce, otherwise they abolish the unemployment and also the poverty. To solve this problem, the government has created the National Renewal Board, like the NRB. NRB takes the responsibility of the providing the compensation to the retrenched workers as well as those seeking the voluntary retirement. Means they will provide the funding, otherwise the different compensation to those workers which is joined for that industry. So that the NRP plays the important role for that deprivatization. Then the next is like this Navratna states. See, the Navratna status is the most important. These are the 9 industries which is play the important role. So that is called as the Navratnas. See, we know that during this the 1997-98, the nine public sector units were selected and given the status of Navratnas. Like the first is the IOC, like the Indian Oil Corporation, then ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, then HPCL, like Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited. The Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, then the Indian Petrochemicals Corporation Limited, Videsh Sanchar Nigam Limited, Bharat Heavy Electrical Limited, Steel Authority of India Limited, then the National Thermal Power the Corporation. These 9 units, like the Navratnas. At present, the public sector units have been further categorized into the Mini Ratnas and the Maharatnas. So, during the 1997-98, 9 public sector units were selected and given the status of Navratnas on the basis of the performance. These Navratnas were given full financial and the managerial autonomy. The Navratna status is the most important. So these are the components of the privatization. Okay, I think you have to better understood that part. So goodbye everybody.